What's up everybody and welcome to the channel. In today's video we're going to learn how to drive a manual transmission. Now I have made these videos several times over the years, however, never hurts to make an updated version. There's always a whole new demographic of buyers and drivers of manual transmission cars. And quite honestly, as much as manuals seem to be a dying breed, lately there are more and more brand new cars available with a stick shift. Honda Civic Type-R, the BMW M cars, Toyota Supra, Mazda Miata, Ford Mustang, and the list keeps going on and on. So manual transmissions are an old school way to drive a car. They're a heck of a lot of fun. By today's standards, they are a little bit slower than the modern automatics and dual clutches, but sometimes nothing beats rowing through some gears. So let's go ahead and get through the basics. What is a manual transmission? How do you drive one? How do you get up and moving if you're going to be biking up your first stick shift? So first and foremost, a manual transmission car has a stick shift. So as you can see, we have this shifter thing right in the center of the car where you can select your gears. And then in your pedal box, you're going to see three pedals. You have your gas pedal on the right, your brake pedal in the center, and the new one is the clutch pedal far left. That is going to be only for your left foot. So that's kind of what is new in this car. Now to operate a lot of this vehicle, the clutch pedal, when you press it all the way down, basically what you're doing is disconnecting the engine from the transmission. There's a thing in the middle called a clutch. It is a series of plates and discs that kind of lock together basically. So when I'm pressing the clutch, I'm opening a spring, holding those all apart to where the engine can spin freely independent from the transmission. As I slowly take my foot off the clutch pedal, we are connecting that clutch back together, and then now you have mated your transmission to engine. So the rotation of the engine spins your transmission, which drives your wheels and drives your car. So to go ahead and start, you're going to be probably in a big empty parking lot, a flat area that is ideal, and you're going to press your foot on the clutch and go ahead and fire up the car. So from there, you want to always kind of wobble the shifter. That lets you know you are in the neutral position, and then you can take your foot off the clutch, no big deal. And then a quick close-up of what your gear selector looks like. As you can tell, we have your different gears written out on the shift knob, and if I press that clutch pedal in, we can go into everything. First gear, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Now reverse is going to be in one of the corners. As you can see, this one is far right and down. You just push it a little bit harder and pop it into gear, and that'll be in reverse now. Every car will be a little bit different. It might be far left and up, left and back, and then sometimes you have to push them down or there's an unlock. Just depends on what kind of car you have. This one you just got to press it a little bit harder over and it will pop into gear. So now that we have the good basics down of the shifter, kind of how that works, the clutch pedal, the different pedals down there, one of the things that I did back in the day when I was first learning to drive a manual, first thing you do when you hop into the car, feel out the gas pedal. So literally rev the car a little bit. Now I don't mean redlining it going crazy, but just feel out what little bit of throttle pedal input does to the engine. Because when you're driving this car, you don't want to be ripping it high RPMs when you're just learning. So if I just give it a little bit of gas, as you can see from my foot, I am barely touching that gas pedal, and we are building the revs just a little bit. Now this Type-R has a cool throttle percentage gauge in the gauge cluster. As you can see with the tachometer, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4, that big thing on the top of the screen, that is your tach, which is the engine's revs. That is how quickly your engine is spinning. So in a manual, you kind of need to know a little bit more about cars than just a typical automatic where you just hit the gas pedal. But the rev of the engine is very important. As you can see, we're idling close to 900 RPM. If I give it 1% throttle, you can see how it's slowly building the revs to 2000. So you want to learn to play with just a couple percentages of throttle input. As you can see, we're keeping the revs under 2000. So with that said, to get up and go, foot on the brake with your right foot, disengage whatever type of park and brake your car has. It might be manual, it might be electronic. From here, we're going to push in that clutch pedal, pop it into first gear. Now, of course, you're on flat ground to start, so no big deal. Let's take your foot off the brake. So now, here is the hardest part. Everything else is pretty easy. This is the 90% of learning to drive stick. We're going to slowly take my foot off the clutch. Now, as I do this, the revs are going to start dipping down a little bit, and as you can see, we're moving just a little bit. And notice how I didn't even touch the gas pedal or anything like that. So sometimes it also helps to start going downhill. It just gives you a little bit extra assistance. But basically the goal is I'm going to give it just a little bit of gas, keep those revs just above 1,000. And I'm going to do that same slow motion with my foot, taking my foot off the clutch. As soon as I start feeling the car move and those revs dips, that's called the bite point. That is when that clutch pedal is re-engaging and starting to connect, and the engine and transmission are starting to connect once again. Therefore, the car is going to start moving. So the goal is, as you take your foot off the clutch, you start feeling it move a little bit. Give it just the slightest bit of gas. Keep it above 1,000 RPM as I continue to take my foot off the clutch. We're still keeping it around 1,000 RPM. Now I'm perfectly rolling. We're going 7 miles an hour in first gear, and we're just driving like normal. Now to make a shift really easy, you're going to press the clutch and take your foot off the gas, pop it down into second, slowly take your foot off the clutch as you just give it a little bit more throttle once again, keeping it above 1,000 by just a tad. Now when you're in second gear, you're able to go a bit faster in speed. Now we're going 15. To go to third, clutch in, off the gas, up a little to the right, into third, slowly off the clutch, back on the throttle just a little bit, and we're rolling. So that's basically how you're going to learn how to drive just in a parking lot. That's all you need to do. When you come to a standstill, clutch in. I'm going to go right to neutral. Again, I can wobble it, foot off the clutch, and slow down just like that. Now on to reverse. Since we're still in a parking lot, it's basically like first gear. Clutch in, put it into whatever orientation your reverse is, so all into reverse, foot off the brake. This one, a lot of times you don't need any gas. So if I slowly take my foot off the clutch, kind of riding the clutch a little bit, so I'm holding it at that bite point, and we're moving in reverse. Now reverse has a much different gear ratio to where you generally don't need to put any throttle input in the car, but that's all you do for reverse. It's just like first gear, just be a little bit more sensitive and don't just like take your foot off the clutch too quickly, because this has more torque in it to where I'm rolling in reverse at 5 miles an hour super easy off the clutch. So you just want to be a little gentle with reverse. If you're going up a hill, you might need to give it a tad bit of throttle, but once again, just that little bit, 2% throttle as I slowly take my foot off the clutch, and that's how you're going to do slow speeds. So before we get out on the main road, one of the most challenging things I encountered when I was first learning to drive manual is a hill start. You're going to encounter this, and it can be very scary, especially in the beginning. So a hill start, as expected, you're on a hill, particularly facing upwards. Downhill is no big deal, but going uphill is a little scary. So taking my foot off the brake, as you can see, I'm rolling backwards a little bit. Now that gets very sketchy when there's cars behind you in traffic, because clearly you could roll into the car behind you, which you would never think about in an automatic. But the way to do this, basically, put your foot on the clutch, put it into first gear. Before I take my foot off the brake, I'm gonna slowly take my foot off that clutch and find that bite point. I can just feel the car like vibrate a tad. At that moment, that's when you take your foot off the brake. So basically you're using that clutch slipping. That slip point is kind of when there's enough resistance to hold the car still. So take my foot slowly off the clutch, I'm feeling it bite, and with my foot off the brake, we are not rolling. I'm slipping the clutch a tad. I'll give it a little bit of gas and continue taking my foot off the clutch, and we are starting uphill just like normal. So basically a hill start is exactly like flat ground. Just once you get to that bite point in that clutch pedal, take your foot off the brake and give it the slightest bit of gas, maintaining that exact position on the clutch. So hold it at that slip point as you give it a little bit of gas, and then continue that motion of removing your foot from the clutch, and you're not going to roll back at all. So the last slow speed tip in a manual is, how do you park one of these cars? So pulling into a parking space, the sequence that you park is important, especially if you're on a hill. If you're in flat ground, like in your garage or something, you can just leave it in gear, shut the car off, no big deal. Now, when you're on a hill, what I'm going to do, go to neutral, take my foot off the clutch. I'm just holding the car still with my foot brake. I'm going to go ahead, engage the parking brake, and take my foot off of the foot brake and shut off the car. From here, with the engine off, I'm pressing the clutch, pop it into gear, take my foot back off the clutch. So now we basically have two fail-safes. So the electronic parking brake is holding the weight of the car. It's what is parking this car. However, we're in gear just in case. If somehow the parking brake does fail or something, being in gear is going to prevent you from rolling away. Now, if you are in neutral, parked on a hill, if your parking brake fails, I don't think it'll let me disengage an electronic one. But if you have a manual parking brake with that little lever, if that cable breaks or something, the car can literally start to roll away. So if I do fire the car back up, with my foot on the brake, I can disengage that parking brake. And now let me put it into gear, shut off the engine. So from here, as I take my foot off the brake, you might have noticed I just rolled back slightly. As of now, the car is parked on the transmission, which isn't really ideal. That's putting a lot of weight on the transmission, which you don't want to do. Now, the reason why you want to park it that sequence is because you could maybe pop it into neutral, or something could happen to where your car can roll away. So let's say back into neutral by accident, my foot's on the brake. If I just get out of the car and not really think about what I'm doing, the car could start to roll away without you knowing. As you saw, luckily it only rolled a foot, but honestly, cars are really easy to push. And if you're on a steep hill, that could roll away into somebody else's car or into a person, and that would be a disaster. So make sure you always park with the park and brake first, shut the engine off, take your feet off the clutch and brake, then pop it into gear as a failsafe, and you'll be good to go. Now I'm starting on a hill once again, so I'm gonna do that hill start maneuver where I slowly take my foot off the clutch, find that bite point, give it a little bit of throttle as I continue taking my foot off the clutch, and we can get up and go just like we talked about. So as you can see from that sequence, you're just doing that same motion over and over again. Now as you have cars in front of you slowing down, you might need to hit the brakes. You can hit the brakes and not really worry about what gear you're in. However, if you get too slow in a certain gear, you're not gonna have any power. So I'm in 6th gear, I just had to slow down to 30 miles an hour, and my RPM's around 1,000. There's not much power at 1,000 RPM, so I need to downshift. So I'm gonna put my clutch in, go downshift, slowly take my foot off the clutch, and then back on the throttle once again. Now, a lot of modern cars will have an automatic rev match system like this car does. Some cars you can turn that off, or some cars won't have that, and you might need to do a rev match. Now, what is a rev match? When you're going down in the gears, every gear lower, the RPM is going to be higher. The engine needs to spin faster to basically maintain your current speed in a lower gear. So I'm going 2,000 RPM, 5th gear at 40 miles per hour. If I go down into 4th gear to maintain 40 miles an hour, the RPMs are probably going to be 500 higher. So clutch in, down into 4. You might have heard that slight little rev match that the car automatically did, and now we're maintaining the same speed. It revved it up again as I downshifted into 3rd. Now, how do you manually do that if your car doesn't have an automatic system? Clutch in, put it in the down gear, just give it a little bit of throttle every single downshift, and we have a nice smooth downshift. You can also just slowly downshift and slowly take your foot off the clutch. It's just going to be a little abrupt. You might feel the resistance, and of course it will take a little bit more time since you're going to be slower on the clutch release. But nonetheless, those are kind of the basics. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, stay tuned for plenty more content. Manual transmissions are a heck of a lot of fun, even if they are a tad bit slower than the modern autos these days. There's nothing else like rowing through some gears. I'll see you guys in the next video.